In this part of the series, we are going to explore security information and event management platforms, abbreviated as a SIEM, and I'm going to show you how to install Wazuh, a well-known open source SIEM to use in your cybersecurity lab. Let's get started. Hey guys, I'm Lal and welcome back to my channel. In this episode of our Cybersecurity Lab Building series, we're going to start building our Security Operations Center, or SOC, by installing Wazuh as our SIEM. So what is a SIEM? A SIEM is the abbreviation for Security Information and Event Management, which is a software platform that collects data such as logs, configurations, and events from endpoints via an agent, an API call, syslog, or even a stream like SNMP, which is Simple Network Management Protocol, or NetFlow or IPFix. Once the SIEM ingests all this data, it aggregates, organizes, and indexes it, and through various rules and methods begins to analyze the data for any anomalies, threats, trends, patterns, compliance issues, and so on. Should the SIEM detect something of concern, it alerts the issues and can remediate these issues if it's been configured to do so. Finally, all the alerts, compliance issues, and so on are presented to the cybersecurity analyst, usually through an intuitive web-based dashboard where further investigation can be carried out and remediation steps can be actioned if deemed necessary. So what is Wazuh? Wazuh is an open source security platform that uses an extended detection and response agent, or XDR for short, that feeds data back from the endpoints that has the ability to respond to events if configured to do so. Wazuh's core components consist of an indexer service that searches and analyzes the data, a server cluster that manages all the agents reporting back to the SIEM, as well as worker nodes that process the data against rules, filters, and decoders looking for any anomalies. And finally, a dashboard component, which is where we as analysts will be spending most of our time analyzing the information Wazuh alerted us to, as well as using it to configure and fine-tune the SIEM. Wazuh is highly scalable and can be installed in both single node, which is the case of this lab, or multi-node configurations, depending on the number of agents you have in your environment. They also have a cloud-hosted SaaS solution should you not want to install and maintain the server cluster yourself. So what is Wazuh capable of? This is just a quick summary of all the features and capabilities that Wazuh has to offer. It offers cloud security, threat detection, compliance, and monitoring via its API. Configuration assessment to detect vulnerabilities, unpatched or insecurely configured applications. Vulnerability detection to help find weaknesses before they're exploited. Container security and Docker integration. File integrity monitoring. Incident response, where we can use it to restrict and block malicious activities. Intrusion detection. Wazuh can detect malware, rootkits, network anomalies, etc. Log data analysis. All endpoint logs are made available for us to analyze. Security analytics. Processing of collected data through rules and decoders used in threat intelligence to look out for any issues. And finally, regulatory compliance, so it can be used to help you meet any technical compliance requirements for PCI DSS, GDPR, etc. You should now have a better understanding of what a SIEM is and how Wazuh is an ideal low-cost starting point to get some hands-on experience using a SIEM. Let's jump straight into the installation process. There are many installation options you could consider depending on the size of your environment and unique requirements, ranging from hosting single node configurations to containerization to ready-to-use options such as Amazon Machine Images or AMIs, which can be deployed directly into the cloud. For large-scale deployments, multi-node cluster configuration is recommended. However, for this lab, we're going to go with a single node option that we're going to spin up using the pre-built virtual machine, or OVA, which is an open virtual format, which we'll download and deploy in either to Virtualbox, VMware, or like in my case, with a quick conversion into Hyper-V. A few things to keep in mind regarding your hardware requirements. We generally want to set up our virtual machine to have 4 virtual CPUs, 8 gigs of RAM, and at least 50 gigs of storage for a single node, configured like this, which will be enough to manage 1 to 25 agents and have enough storage to query up to 90 days of historical data, which is more than enough for our lab environment. I will link the complete installation guide in the description for you to check out all the deployment options. So the first step is you're going to head over to the Wazuh download page. I'll put the link in the description. And then you're going to come over to this hyperlink where it says download the virtual appliance, or OVA. If you are using Virtualbox, you'll open up Virtualbox and click on the import button. And then you'll come over to this icon on the right, and it will give you a file dialog box, and from there you can just navigate to wherever you downloaded your OVA file and simply follow the prompts, and it will configure Wazuh for your environment automatically, and you should be able to get up and running fairly quickly with that. If you're using VMware, it's a similar process. I have put a link in the description below with the VMware equivalent of importing that OVA. If you are using Hyper-V, you first have to extract the .vmdk file using 7-zip, so that's the file there. Then once you've extracted the file, you then need to use Virtualbox's command line tools by firstly opening PowerShell or command prompt and then navigating to C program files Oracle Virtualbox like I have. And then the command that you're going to be running is vboxmanage.exe clone medium, and then we're going to be formatting this vmdk file as a VHD like I've done over here. And then the input file is going to be the directory and the name of the vmdk file, which you will have to put in there. And then the output file is going to be whatever you want to call that output file .vhd. You're going to hit enter. It's going to take a couple of minutes and it's going to convert to the VHD file for you. The final step of the process is we're going to have to create the virtual machine within Hyper-V. So you're going to come over to your Hyper-V manager and you're going to say on the right hand side new and virtual machine. And this is just the prompt that you'll have to follow, so we can just click next. We're going to give the virtual machine a name. The next step is it's going to ask us to specify the generation of our virtual machine. Because this is a VHD file, we're just going to leave it as generation 1 for now. And you'll click next. We're then going to allocate our memory to it. As I mentioned earlier, I suggest at least 8 gigs of memory to make this work. And you don't have to use dynamic memory allocation for this. You can just uncheck that if you wish, if you just want to give it a static amount of 8 gigs of memory. The next step is we'll configure the network. So in this case, I've set up a LabNet virtual switch and we'll assign it to that. And then the final part of the step is mounting the virtual hard drive. So what we'll do in this case is we're not going to create a new virtual hard drive. We're going to use a existing hard drive. And over here, we will then select or browse to where you've created the the .vhd file in the previous step, you will then mount that to this particular virtual machine, and you'll click finish, and then Hyper-V will complete the installation for you, and you'll be able to then run the machine and see it present under all your other virtual machines in this part of the GUI. So once you have Wazuh configured in whichever virtual machine environment you're going to be using, we're going to then start up Wazuh. So in this case, I'm just going to right click and then say start. Click connect. And you'll see that in a couple of seconds that Wazuh has booted up. The default username and password for this virtual machine is wazuh-user as the username, and the password is just Wazuh. And we'll be logged into our server. This particular virtual machine is based on CentOS. And by default, the network interface that has been configured is set up to be running as a DHCP in bridge mode. So we need to make sure that we update our settings to reflect how we wish to join this machine into our lab environment. If you look at my previous OpenSense firewall installation videos, I showed you how to configure Virtualbox network settings. So similar methods can be followed here in order to get Wazuh linked up to our network. I recommend that for your lab, you create an internal virtual network and then you configure a static IP address. So to do this in CentOS, you need to firstly find your network adapter name. So we'll just run a IPA, and if we look at the output, we'll see that Ethernet 0 or ETH0 is the name of our particular interface. In order to configure a static IP address on our network interface, we need to head over and change the following network config. So we'll use a sudo vi, and the file we're looking for is in etc sysconfig network scripts, and then we're going to use ifcfg dash and whatever the name of your interfaces that we discovered earlier. So in this case, it would be ETH0. We're going to hit enter. We're then going to supply our root password and hit enter. And then you'll see that we have this configuration file. Initially, this will look slightly different. You'll see that it'll have the type set as Ethernet and the device set as Ethernet and on boot and so forth, but there won't be any IP address configured here or net mask or gateway or anything like that. It will just have DHCP configured. So then we would then need to go into this file and insert everything in here like I've done, where you need to give it a name, an IP address, whatever IP address your lab network uses. Mine runs on 10.200.200.x. So I've configured this as 5. And it's running on a Class C network, and the gateway I've supplied is that of my OpenSense firewall, and I'm just using Google's DNS 8.8.8.8. Once you've inserted the new information into this file, you will then hit Shift:, and you will then follow by typing WQ, which basically just says write and quit. For those of you that aren't familiar with VI, to be able to insert data into this file, you'll hit Shift-I, and then you can navigate to the line that you need to insert the data and type it in as normal. Now we'll be back in our command line. The next step is we need to completely restart the network service on our server. So to do this, we will type in sudo systemctl, and then we will type restart and then network and hit enter. And then the network service will restart. If you go back and check your IP address, you'll see that it's been configured. And if you like, you can also reboot your virtual machine. It will have the same result. We're then going to head back to our Windows 10 desktop that's connected to the same lab network. And we're going to open up our browser and we're going to head across to 10.200.200.5, which was the IP address of our Wazuh machine. And we're going to hit enter. Initially, you'll have a certificate warning that will pop up. This is just because the certificate has been self-signed. And then you'll be presented with the default Wazuh login page. The default credentials for this particular virtual machine is just admin, and the password is admin. We're going to click login. And then Wazuh will do some checks and it will log us directly into this dashboard. Because this is a fresh installation of Wazuh, there's going to be no real information for us to see here yet. So the next step of the installation is to configure some agents, which we're going to be installing on this Windows 10 machine, as well as a Linux version on one of the Ubuntu 20.04 servers that I've set up. So to do this, we're going to click on the add agent, and it's a four-step process. In this case, we're going to select the operating system we want to deploy to. So in this case, we're going to use Windows, or start with Windows first, and then the Wazuh server address. So this can be a IP address or a fully qualified domain name. In this case, my server address is 10.200.200.5. We're not going to assign this to any agent group yet. We haven't created any of those. There's just a default group, but this could come in handy if you ever are in a situation where you want to separate your agents based on your device or your operating system, or whether it's a desktop endpoint or a server endpoint, and so on. The next part of the process is the install and enrollment phase. So if you scroll down, you'll see that Wazuh just gives us a few warnings here. Just says that you'll need administrator privileges to perform the installation and PowerShell 3.0 up. And then what it does is it creates a installation script for us, which will run in PowerShell, and you'll see that it's pre-populated some of the information in there, like the Wazuh manager, which points back to our IP address, and the registration server, which also points back to Wazuh's server IP address. We'll then just click on copy the command. We're then going to open up PowerShell as an administrator. So we'll just right click on it and say run as administrator. Say yes. And then we will paste that command into PowerShell and we'll hit enter. And we'll give it a few minutes. It's then going to download the agent and configure the agent for us automatically. We're then going to need to start the agent. So to do this, we can go back to the configuration page, and then there's a command here, net start wazuh svc, which will then start the service. So we'll come back to PowerShell, pop that in and hit enter. And then you'll see the Wazuh service is starting, and it has successfully started. Just to confirm that it is actually running, we can always go and check it out in the services. So if you search for services and you can just type in Wazuh, you'll see that the Wazuh service is actually running. And now we can head back to our Wazuh dashboard. And you'll see that we have at the top left, total agents 1 and active agents. So we've successfully managed to enroll the one Windows agent onto our system. If we click on it, then we can see there's a whole lot of information it gives us about this particular machine. So the registered agent's name, how many times it's connected and disconnected, and various other information here that we'll look at in later videos. So the next part of the installation, we're going to add another agent for our Ubuntu 2004 server, as I mentioned earlier. So in order to do this, we are going to come over to this bit where it says deploy a new agent. We are then going to select our operating system. So in this case, it's a Ubuntu operating system. Our architecture is x86-64. We're once again going to be pointing it to our Wazuh server, which is 10.200.200.5. We're not going to worry about any groups. And then similar to how it worked with the Windows installation, it's just given us a script here, which we will then click copy. We're then going to open PowerShell again. And we're going to SSH into our Ubuntu server. So it would be SSH, and then the user on that machine is lab at, and the IP address is 10.200.200.21. We'll hit enter. Password. And then we logged into that machine. And then we're just going to give it some sudo rights. And we're going to then copy the script that we created with the Wazuh agent deployment wizard, and we're going to hit enter. And then the system will go and download all of the things that it needs to make that work. And then what we need to do is we need to come to this section and we need to start the agent. So we're going to copy all these commands directly from the wizard. We'll then hit enter again, and what the Wazuh agent will then start. We can then head back to our Wazuh dashboard. Let's just refresh the page. And you'll now see that we have two agents appearing and configured. So if you'll click on the total agents, you can now see that we have a Windows 10 machine, which we set up earlier, and then the newly configured Ubuntu 2004 server. In later videos, we're going to dive into more detail regarding this particular Wazuh dashboard. We're going to play around with it, play around with some of the settings, see what it's capable of. For now, the main goal of this video was just to get us set up and running. And for the future videos that will be coming up after this, I intend to follow the same idea where we will be configuring all of our SOC infrastructure first. And then once we're up and running and have all of it integrated, we'll then dive into the actual dashboards and labs and start configuring and playing and testing various things. So to wrap this part of the lab up, we've now successfully configured Wazuh and deployed two different agents into our lab. If you guys have enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give me a thumbs up, to like and subscribe, and keep a lookout over the next couple of weeks. I will be adding more videos into the series. The next video is coming up is going to be a configuration where we're going to look at the Hive and MISP and Cortex, and we're going to look at how we can build that into our SOC environment. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you guys soon. Cheers for now.